Okay, we're back. I want to thank AVfM for calling into the show. Now, I've actually got to pay a few bills here. As some longer-term listeners of the show are probably aware, once in a while we get the tin cup out and we ask people to make a donation. That's what keeps this show going. It allows us to pay for the servers, pay for the bandwidth, pay the license for Blog Talk Radio. And I'm going to suggest to people that if they have a few extra dollars in their pocket, to go over to avoiceformen.com and locate the donation button on the right-hand side and either set up a one-time or a recurring donation of a small amount. We appreciate every single penny and dollar that we get. It's what allows us to keep bringing you this show and the website, and I will not harass you about it again until closer to the end of the show. Now that business taken care of, I want to introduce the unofficial co-host of the show, Typhon Blue, who is now on the line. Welcome to the show, Typhon Blue.
Hi, thanks, JTO.
Hey, how you doing, fellow Canuck?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing, fellow Canadian?
I'm awesome. We're in 3 consecutive provinces too, so that's kind of cool too.
Yeah, we represent the West Coast. As of yet, nobody from the East Coast is bothered to show up.
Ontario and Quebec can just fall into the sea.
Yeah, exactly.
We're where it's at.
I don't think we can wax too poetic about Canada. We're probably going to lose most of our audience, but I agree. I'm also on the West Coast. That's all I will say. Now, I talked earlier in the show about hypergamy, which, in case I keep using that word, there may be people who don't know what I mean. This is the tendency of women to seek relationships or to attach themselves to men who are of higher economic or higher social status than themselves. Now, in a patriarchal culture, there is no prevention of hypergamy, but there is some limit on hypergamy in that attachment to a man cannot instantly then discard him, retain his assets or his income, and move on to another one. But with the innovations in family law and divorce law and the increasing feminization of society, we are seeing perhaps, I don't know if I'm going too far to call it the incentivization of hypergamy, certainly the enablement of it by innovations in law and culture, where women are able to act on what is essentially a very primitive instinct. It is not an instinct that leads to a strong sense of social cohesion in the culture. It is not an instinct that is beneficial to children or to the family. It is beneficial to an individual woman only at an individual level for her to skip from provider to provider, looking at men who have a high income or have high status as simply a resource to be exploited, and then when something shinier comes along, discard that man and move on to the next one. My thought here is, and I'm not going to state this as a declaration, because if I did, I think people's heads would explode, but women's ability and the social acceptance of this practice of hopscotching from one man to another is, in my view, the behavior of a primitive hominid and not the behavior of a modern, socialized, civilized human being.
Well, this is kind of what I've been saying for a while, is that we are headed kind of right back to the cave. Just as far as the kind of the Lord of the Flies element of things, when there's no set of rules that people have to live by, and that could be everybody or that could be just like a significant portion of the population. There's no set of actual rules. There's no code of ethics that's enforceable either legally or socially. You're going to have people acting on the backs of their brains rather than the fronts of them. So, yeah.
What's your question?
My question is it reasonable to look at this, the hypergamous behavior that is enabled by innovations in the family law and divorce law, of always marrying either upwards socially or economically, and then once you marry upwards from a female perspective, whoever it is you married upwards to the level of, they are now at the same level. So they don't quite have the shine that they had prior to that engagement, prior to that involvement.
And then you can step on their head to get up to the next one.
Yeah, you're going to treat guys as stepping stones, always moving up, always moving up. Now, this is obviously beneficial to a woman to do this.
Well, at least until she hits 30 or 35.
Yeah, I mean, assuming she doesn't discard the last one in the chain and she stays where she is and then is not discarded herself by the guy who realizes that his social stock is rising as he moves from his 30s to his 40s.
Well, I think the issue I think the issue for a lot of women, and a lot of the sort of the articles that I see written, even by feminists these days, of they're 35 and they want to settle down, and and the only prospects, they get into the freaking dating pool finally, for long-term prospects, and it's all guys who aren't even as good as the ones they dumped like 7 years ago, but this is a measure of her value having gone down, right? But she has done that kind of hopscotching upwards, and she thinks somehow she's under the illusion that that's just going to continue forever. And as she gets higher social status and a sort of a higher opinion of herself along the way, that she's going to be able to continue to increase on that cachet, and her looks and her youth and her fertility really have nothing to do with that. And then she hits 35, and it all those illusions come crashing down, and she realizes, and she ends up feeling like she has to settle, when in reality, in relative terms, as far as what women find attractive in men and what men find attractive in women, he's settling for her.
Can I add something to that? I think in a lot of sense that it's more than just looks and fertility. I think it's settling emotionally. Not her, but him, because he's settling for somebody who has dumped a succession of people, or men,
and who has never learned how to compromise.
And never learned how to compromise. So,
yeah.
I mean, if you're, and I think it's really rare, but if you're a woman who actually is emotionally on the ball, personally, I don't think you probably get out of your 20s before getting married. But and you do end up, I think that your prospects are a bit better than a woman who's dumped a whole bunch of guys, does not know how a relationship works, and
and then when the guy asks her, "Will you marry me?" she gets this look on her face that makes it look like she's just been forced to eat bird droppings before she says yes.
Well, a woman who actually would conceive of a relationship in terms of settling.
Yeah, this is. Honestly,
guys, I'm gonna quickly interrupt the conversation here. I'm reading from the chat room that we cannot be heard. We are breaking up and sound like robots.
Oh dear.
If anybody can give me some feedback there, I don't know what we can do about that except speak very clearly. So I'm just going to
Is there any one of us who's breaking up more than the other?
Apparently we are all breaking up. My thought is when Karen was talking about this, about a woman who in her 20s moving into her 30s finds her social stock falling, finds herself unable to attract the same financial or social level of man to come along and be a provider, protector, all those great shiny things. Is this really a realization? Is there actually a realization and a maturing that goes on, or is it just that suddenly my coin doesn't buy what it used to? Oh well, I guess I'll have to settle. Because I have read an awful lot of not necessarily feminist writing. Some of it is from the social conservative side of things, exhorting men to, what's wrong with you, stupid men? Why won't you step up and marry us, date us, buy us dinner, continue to romance us, and put some of your money towards buying us stuff.
Yeah, why won't you just take what's available?
Yeah,
and be happy.
I have to admit to a certain degree of sour amusement at this rhetoric that I see emerging in a lot of different places like the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, New York Times, and so on. Even in Salon.com, I read these articles saying women are steaming mad that men will not man up, will not step up, will not date us or
they're not
or marry us.
Either. They're not performing. Because the number of men who are actually performing at the level that women would like and would like to get married to, are the percentage of men who are actually fulfilling that is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so women who might have, say, a 35-year-old woman with a doctorate degree now, she might have been a 35-year-old woman who teaches elementary school, 50 years ago, and she would be able to get a more productive, more attractive man 50 years ago than she is now with a doctorate degree, because there are just so few men on her social and economic and educational level now, right? And all of these highly educated women are competing. They're competing on the criteria of he needs to be more successful than me, and all the men are thinking she just needs to be prettier than me and more fertile, right? So they have completely different criteria that are based on relative terms.
I would say that I think it's the women that are driving this more than the men, the expectations of the women more than the men, and I find it sort of deeply hilarious that we're creating a society in which women have to go face to face with their what you call their hypergamous instincts, because men are falling and women are rising, and suddenly,
suddenly nobody's good enough for her.
But the thing is that the woman in question really needs to sit herself down and ask what's good enough, and start pruning that particular tree, not settling, but recognize that, companionship has a value in and of itself.
This is true. I agree. This is one reason why my boyfriend is with me, despite being, significantly younger than me, is the value of that. But when you look at sort of the bare bones of what women find attractive in men and what men find attractive in women, women are actually, because they are becoming more economically successful and socially successful, right? They're setting the bar higher for the men that they want to be attracted to, right? But they aren't increasing. They're waiting longer before they want to settle down. So they're decreasing their attractiveness to men, because men are going on the instincts that say, well, only out of our 8 kids, only 2 are going to survive, so you better be young, you better be fertile, you better be prepared to do this more than a couple of times. So I want someone young, I want someone pretty, I want someone healthy, and I want someone, who has a nurturing nature, right? So all of those sort of instinctive criteria for men as to what they're attracted to in women is, as she gets older and more set in her ways and maybe more aggressive from being out in the business world and in the workforce and all of those things, she's actually getting less attractive to him, and she's pricing men out of the market for her. So it's kind of this double whammy of she's less attractive to him, he's less attractive to her based on their individual criteria, based on gender, that neither of them seem to be as aware of as they should, right?
Well, I'm going to slightly disagree, and maybe this isn't exactly a disagreement, but there's another element here that bears consideration. That is that when I was in my 20s, there was a very strong element within the dating scene of guys my age back then in my 20s looking for relationships with women who were in their mid to late 30s and even their mid 40s. And there was, and I was one of them. I won't deny that I was one of them. And one of the major attractions was the level of sort of calm maturity that could be expected from a woman in her late 30s.
I
point
had,
of view of a man.
When I was on the market, I had plenty of men in their early to mid 20s who messaged me and were interested, and I think basically my response to them usually amounted to no, you're going to have to pay your dues and have a decade of bad sex and dysfunctional relationships, just like the rest of us. So,
or you could do what I did.
Unenthusiastic starfish sex and petty demands and stamping of feminine feet. That's what everybody before you had to deal with, and that's what you need to deal with now. So call me in a decade.
Fair enough. That's a fair enough rebuttal. But I remember at the time having been one of these guys. I remember when people used to be critical of this viewpoint that I had, saying I was looking for a free ride. I was looking for someone to pay my way, and I guarantee you that was not the case. I was a software entrepreneur back then. I had my own company. I was a workaholic. I was definitely economically on the upward move in my 20s. And what the thing that I wanted wasn't some shiny, perky breasted bimbo, although that certainly grabbed my attention whenever I saw it. But in terms of wanting a relationship with somebody, what I wanted was a mature adult, and I didn't see mature adulthood in women my own age back then. I do now.
This is one of my guys' constant comments to me is that number one, I mean, because he's definitely gotten around a bit, and he's made his share of conquests, I guess you would say. And when we first started seeing each other, he was seeing this incredibly gorgeous 23-year-old nursing student who was kind of an emotional black hole. And but what I think what he really wanted, and it wasn't even necessarily maturity, it was somebody that he felt that he could lean on to. And it wasn't even just like him leaning on somebody, but two people leaning on each other, as opposed to it all being one way, as opposed to the energy always being sucked out of him and into the other person. And that was the main deciding factor for him to commit to me, was that I may suck some of his energy, but I definitely give it back. And I think a lot of especially, young pretty women, they don't feel like they have to, and in many ways they don't have to in order to be able to have a boyfriend, or to be able to get laid, or be able to be popular, or to be able to have any kind of social cachet. They don't have to be, I guess, normal, regular people who give as much as they demand.
I think you had it perfectly when you called them emotional black holes.
I've also called them what walking, talking black holes in a mini skirt whose pussies chew up men, and then they don't much care whether she swallows them or spits them out.
So that's sort of something I was trying to get at with that. I think, there is the instinctive, young, fertile, but I think we're underplaying sane in the dating scheme, which makes me sort of wonder about the women who are getting to 35 and saying, "Oh, there's no good men, or nobody's interested in me." Well, there's probably a reason, and it doesn't have to do with the shallowness of men. It probably has to do with the emotional perspicacity of men, recognizing that you are probably no longer that attractive emotional black hole.
Well, I think too, a lot of these women kind of get tricked in their 20s into thinking that even though they're an emotional black hole, they will, because those types of women, because they can be just consummate manipulators, often, and I've run into several men who fall into this trap, and then they repeatedly fall into it. They sort of get lured in and they chase and they want and they forgive and forgive and forgive and forgive, and then that particular woman will end up dumping them for, whatever criteria, whatever cause, whatever reason, justification or rationalization she can figure, and move on to the next one. And it's sort of like a scorched earth policy of leaving these kind of devastated men who tried as hard as they could to feed the black hole. You just keep throwing things into it, hoping it doesn't explode. And then all it ever gives back is a reflection of what you've thrown into it. And they keep moving from, they burn out one man, they move to the next. They burn out the next one, they move to the next one. And they hit a point where they are no longer, their other attractive features like their looks, their youth, the sense of mystique, their body, all of those things, where those no longer are enough to distract men from all of that horrible, horrible crap, and they lose their power to manipulate based on that. And all of a sudden they're like, what the hell happened?
Well, here's
what
the
do you
thing
mean I'm alone?
Is when you get to that point, I wouldn't say forgive. I can understand going through life as an emotional lawnmower and chewing up everything that comes your way and spitting it out and exploiting the living bejesus out of every man that crosses your path. I don't necessarily forgive that. I don't think that's excusable behavior.
I think many men are prepared to forgive that and try again. Forgive it and try again. Forgive it and try again.
The problem is, once you arrive in your 30s, once the shine of youth is slightly beginning to fade, and women in their mid to late 30s start finding out that their coin doesn't purchase what it used to anymore, and they still don't get it. They do not realize, well, why won't anybody date me anymore? Why won't guys buy me stuff?
Yeah. Why can't I make it to the third date?
Yeah, my
this
hypothesis
guy was a bigger
here
loser
is that
than the one 3 years ago.
Yeah, that these women are essentially primitives. They are not using their cognitive functions. They are going through their life as a cave woman, a caveman, as a primitive hominid running on their reptile brain rather than the more functional part of their forebrain.
No ethics, no ability to integrate observable reality into their worldview.
And we've got another caller on the line. This is Irhauer Androck, and I hope I pronounced that right. And Irhauer Androck, you're on the line.
Hey, thanks, John. You did pronounce it right.
Thank you very much.
Wow, what a show. Very simply, the part of the problem is men spending too much time focusing on women, always focusing on what women want. And, this is why we've got the old MGTOWs, folks like me who are celibate, who are just, you know what, we no longer care. There's nothing that you're going to do that's going to interest me because you've demonstrated a lack of character. And the reason I bring this up is because so often we've seen men say, well, I had no idea she was like this. I had no idea she was going to do this, that, or the other. I had no idea she was a person who was a sociopath or whatever. There's always signs. And my BS meter, my nonsense meter, is so hyper-aware that as soon as a woman starts doing something like this, I just walk away. I just don't tolerate it. And so whether it comes to the hypergamous women or whatever you're talking about, where women look for a man above them, I think what men should start to do is look for women above them. And when men start to do that, men will stop dating.
Well, what really gets me is that, everybody says that, society used to be male, and it still is. They all insist that it still is male-dominated. And even back when society was arguably male-dominated, it was still female-centric. And I think the issue of men focusing too much on women, this is just how it is until you kind of disabuse yourself of the entire, the sticky coating of instinct and culture and society and all of that. You just kind of strip that. You go into the decon shower and you scrub yourself for an hour with lye and a wire brush to get all of that off, and then you can actually say, okay, I'm focusing too much on women. Like, we're all focusing too much on women and what women want and what women need and how women are doing. But I mean, this is just what our society's like. And it's what our society has always been like, even under what feminists call capital P patriarchy. So,
well, that's
sure, but this is one of the advantages to the matriarchy. This is one of the advantages as a man myself, who was raised by a single abusive mother. My BS meter started going off when I was 12, 13, 14, 15 years old.
You had the decon shower when you were like 6.
Sure. And so what needs to happen, and what's going to continue to happen, with what we're doing with our projects, we're looking for the younger men because we keep on finding more and more of the younger men are raised by single mothers, and more of the younger men have had it. More and more of the younger men, whether it's young women in their 20s or women in their 30s, women in their 20s now are starting to lose their value because the young men simply more and more are tolerating them less and less. All of the young men I know simply don't tolerate anything from women. The minute they pull any of the nonsense, they up and walk away. And, of course, I give regular advice. If she says this or she says that or does this type of behavior, when you're out on a date with her, stand up, pay your part of the check, and leave, and never talk to her again. And they take to that advice quickly because they've been raised by mothers like that. And it's just that simple. So on the one hand,
won't be new information for them.
Go on again.
I was going to suggest that this won't be new information for these guys. The only possibly new part of that for them is to have somebody actually map it for them. And it's like having a light turned on in a dark room.
Almost give them permission to do it. This is the thing, because it's socially unacceptable to do something like that. And to have somebody outside of you, somebody externally, say, it's okay for you to say, you are not up to my standards, that's it, bullshit over, I'm paying my share of the tab, goodbye.
What's really funny is that I've heard, I sometimes frequent a Reddit sub called 2X, and occasionally I hear the stories of the girls who, he had sex with me and then he didn't call me back, or he totally lost interest in me, or in one case we just kissed and then he never phoned me back, and we didn't have sex, and they're always like, well, obviously we were just a booty call. And sometimes I go in and I say, well, maybe there was something creepy about you that turned him off. I don't usually say it in those terms. I'm more polite, but sometimes it isn't about, the man being superficial. It's about him exercising his emotional radar and realizing that, I'm about to get sucked into a black hole.
Well, I don't know that I've ever had sex with somebody and not had them, indicate that they, had them not want to have contact with me afterwards.
Well, in one case, she was trying to say that the guy was a booty call when they made out at a party, and then he said, well, we could have sex tonight, or she said that or something, and then they got separated, and there was no indication that she wouldn't have sex with him the next day or subsequent days, and yet he still just dropped her. And I'm like, the likelihood that it was about sex is minimal. It was probably about something extremely off-putting about your behavior.
Well, and on top of that, honestly, over and above all of that, this thing, the thing with the SPLC and Rouge, how he sleeps with women and then makes a point not to call them the next day, and that makes him a misogynist. And, part of me is like, okay, so we want to get away. Feminists are always harping on about wanting to get away from all of those analogies, the good key, bad lock analogy, the women are the gatekeepers of sex analogy, the sex is transactional analogy. If you have sex with somebody and you have an expectation of them that goes beyond the extent of the sex that you had as a woman, right? If you think he owes you anything after that, then you're only just feeding into all of that stuff that feminists claim to be opposed to.
They're against it when it's negative, apparently, for a woman.
Yeah.
And they're for it when it's positive. But the thing is that every situation in life has both negatives and positive. There's nothing that's pure positive. I mean, if you're
and when I look at it, I think, what's she lost? Like what? I don't know, depending on circumstances.
Couple minutes, awkward
20 minutes to an hour and a half of her life that she'll never get back, and and a couple of condoms that she might have provided.
I disagree with that. She didn't lose 20 minutes of her life. She was given 20 minutes by a living God in the flesh, and she should be thankful that he spent time. Here's the rule with feminism, okay? The rule of feminism is whatever a man wants is what she doesn't want for him, and this is how I know this. I have taken a vow of celibacy, and they claim I am a misogynist for it.
Oh, yeah.
Yet, if I have sex with women, I am a rapist. So no matter what decision I make to have or not have sex,
or you're objectifying.
I'm objectifying. So whenever I'm dealing, and this is how we deal with them in our culture, the masculinists, when we walk into a place and we see men, we see living gods in the flesh. That's what we do. That's what we see. And we walk up to men at a bar, and we say to the woman, you know what? You're lucky to have this handsome fellow with you. Women do that all the time. They say to men all the time, you're lucky to have this beautiful woman. Well, we say, you're lucky to have this handsome man with you, this man who's noble of character and righteous and good and a God in the flesh. And that's our attitude. We just flip it around, and we no longer tolerate. And this will be the last thing I say, and I'll get off the line so you guys can get back to it. My BS meter goes off when you were talking about that woman on Reddit the minute you said, she said.
Yeah, I mean, she's dealing with a narrative. Now, I want to quickly make a mild objection to what Earhauer has mentioned. I'm not sure if he's being a little bit hyperbolic in saying God's in the flesh. To me, this language is a little bit like, it's almost a parody of the language of the Conscious Men Project, who were trying to exalt women as if they were supernatural beings devoid of any character flaw inherent in being a human being. I understand the use of that language. I don't think I would necessarily go so far as to say men are gods. We're human beings. And I also think women happen to be human beings. All of us are capable of having volition and being either noble or savage, and we should all have accountability.
Going up to a couple and saying, I actually have seen that in the reverse, women going up and saying, oh, you're lucky to have her. And maybe, some balance is required in the cosmos, although it might be more, you're lucky, this guy has given you the greatest gift any human being can give another human being, which is his time. You never get your time
I agree with that. I'm going to agree with that. I agree that possibly this turnaround, maybe if we're not actually saying gods, but if that's the rhetoric that's being used, you're lucky to have this woman in your presence, as if it is as if this is a one-sided gift, as if a woman, by agreeing to lower herself, to sully herself by being in the presence of a lowly man, is giving this great beneficent gift. We have to look at the other side. People are going to give their time and their conversation and their opinion to each other. It's part of the humor commerce of living life and loving other people. It's not one-sided. The women are gods and the men are the lowly supplicants, or the other way around, for that matter.
Well, honestly, I that kind of, because I've had the odd guy on my YouTube channel say, I would treat you like a princess, or I don't have much stock, I don't put much stock in American women or Western women, but you I would treat like a princess, and I'm just like, but what would I do with myself?
But you're not a princess.
No, I'm not a princess.
My nails are broken. I might even be still wearing yesterday's makeup. I'm not sure. It's really, why would I want somebody to treat me that way? That would just make me extremely uncomfortable.
I mean, it would be ridiculous and annoying.
I hate that sort of princessy treatment. Sometimes, a while ago, my husband were purchasing something, a fairly large purchase, and the guy turned to me and said, "You are the most valuable person here." And I was like looking at it, I was like, "What?" And he sensed that I just with me and my husband both there, he turned to me and said, "You're the most valuable person in this transaction." And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
And it's just that you realize I chose this man. This is my choice, and you are now insulting my choice by implying that he's more valuable than I am. Or, sorry, I'm more valuable than he is. And it was just
there's all of these assumptions, right, that go, like me and my boyfriend at the Home Depot picking up insulation and drywall, and the guy at the store automatically turns to my boyfriend and says, "So what do you need?" And he says, "I don't know, it's her project." And then he turns to me and he's got the uncertain look. Well, what is it that you need? And I rattle off a list and I tell him what I'm doing and I tell him what the challenges are, because the person who framed in my basement didn't believe in using a level or a plumb bob and or measuring tape. And and as soon or standard size 2x4s. But as soon as the guy realizes that I know what I'm talking about, all of a sudden we're on an equal footing, right? I go from being the person who's along for the ride to on an equal footing with the guy who's an expert.
Yeah,
and this is really, that's the way I would rather be seen, rather than the person who, he's here to do the heavy lifting and to pick out the stuff and to do all of the work, and I'm just here to make my demands known as to what I want the house to look like, because I am the princess. This is the view of a woman as the difference between a princess, which is an object to be served, an object who doesn't have volition, doesn't have agency, is just, has stuff happen to them or has stuff done to them or has stuff done for them, and a fully realized human being. And unfortunately, we are still living in a society that is treating women as if they are objects to whom stuff is done or for whom stuff is done. No, we're still living in a society where my friend can say, you're not supposed to be out there in the yard with your shovel. You're just supposed to pick out pictures in the magazine, hand them to your husband, and say, here's how I want it to look.
Unfortunately, feminism, which claims to be based on the empowerment of women, is really just reinforcing that old princess mythology. They've dialed it up. They haven't really changed much. I guess they've discarded some of the respect that men have in our society, so they've elevated women and lowered men, but it's not towards equality. It's towards an exacerbation, an escalation of the objectification of women and the further disposability and marginalization of men. Now, not really the topic for tonight's show, but...
or did you want to get back? When you... of course, this is really far from the topic, but when you objectify or you take away women's agency, what they have left to them is either to become very attractive, alluring, cute, or to make the most god-awful, annoying sound that they possibly can so that men will do anything to stop it. And I think that feminists have decided that empowerment is not looking alluring and cute, but making the most god-awful, annoying sound that men will do anything to stop it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the concept of empowerment, has to, if it's real, has to encompass accountability. And that is the uncomfortable part that everybody seems to want to avoid. Which is why when we look at the failure of comprehension, when we see women get a date? Why won't these guys call me back? Why? I spent the whole dinner talking about myself and telling him how great I am. What, didn't he believe me? Why won't he call me back?
Well, because she's basing what she thinks, how great she is, on her own criteria, and she's not considering that he actually might have criteria independent of hers.
Mm-hmm.
He might actually value things in a partner that are different from the things that she values in herself.
I think you're giving more credit than is necessarily due. I think my working hypothesis, I won't call it a theory because I haven't really worked out how to test this yet, is that women are essentially primitives. That we're, and I'm not going to exclude men. Men need to have some blame heaped on them too here. Let's not let this be just the beating up on women show tonight.
Well, I don't think it's that women are any more primitive than men. I just think that women are not held accountable for any of their behavior. Men are still held to a standard of transcending their primitive impulses.
Whose fault is it?
The problem is, though, at least some of the blame I'm going to heap on men who, at least when they're young, when they're in their 20s, and they're still driven by the hormone slosh that is largely in control of the behavior of anybody in their 20s, and anybody in their 20s listening, I apologize, but it's true, that we aren't holding these individuals accountable. There is no motivation for them to be accountable. There's no pressure to grow out of this purely self-interested, avaricious operating mode and become a reasonable, civilized, accountable human being who's actually capable of contributing socially.
I'd point out that used to be the job of our elders, to actually take young people and say, what you're doing is stupid.
Yeah, it's time for you to grow up, hon.
Yeah, it's time for you to grow up and learn what you need to do to have a decent life when you're my age.
Unfortunately, any kind of admonition now towards women that's now qualified as abuse or misogyny or sexism, which
or unfairly generalizing.
Yeah, not all women are like that.
Yeah. All men are rapists, but not all women are, whatever. So
not all NAWR. Not all men are rapists.
Now, Walt.
Yeah, there we go. I'm going to give us a little break here, and we're going to come back in a couple of minutes, and I'm going to give one more pitch for donations, and then we'll be pretty close to the end of the show. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, my call has just dropped. I hope I'm back on the air. I'm sorry about the dead air, guys. I'm going to bring Typhon Blue and Girl Writes What back. Girl Writes What? And Typhon Blue, welcome both back to the show. Hey, guys, sorry about that. My call dropped.
Can you hear me?
I just had to call back in. Yes?
Yeah,
yes, we can hear you.
Typhon.
Good.
So we're back on the air, and sorry about that, everybody, for the little technical glitch up. And what we were talking about is the primitivism of the hypergamous model and its impact on a matriarchal culture, the creation of thug culture for men, the violence that escalates in that kind of a system, and where this is eventually going to take us. And my view is it's not going to take us to a good place. Ultimately, you're going to have a society in which all of the load of all the carrying, all the heavy lifting of a society in which men are de-incentivized to participate as a social level lands on women, and men essentially, generation by generation, become increasingly predatory and warlike. Ultimately, you get a warlord model of local government. Now, can this happen while you still have a strong central government? Or does that government prevent this kind of social decohesion and limit you to just a tiered society in which women are escalated above men financially, economically, and socially?
The problem is that no matter how strong a central government you have, when you have men acting out and you are only concentrating on suppressing and stopping the acting out rather than dealing with causes, that's incarceration, high incarceration rates, lots and lots of crime, huge strain on society, and very little productivity among the men who are not in the top, say, 20% who are able to have any kind of status. And the system starves itself. The government ends up starving.
I would say it depends on what it is the elites want from this situation. I think that in what you're calling a matriarchal system, which is just a mother-led with no father figure or father period, what happens is that you lose that natural human flexibility and innovation. And I think our economy is essentially based on the cycling of new businesses coming up, and because if a new business model is formed, it gathers a lot of employment, it ossifies and then falls off, and then another new business model. So it's this constant rolling of innovation. And when you're creating technology. Yeah, and that's I think in a lot of ways what drives our economy. So when you create these generations upon generations of partially socialized children who haven't learned or don't have the emotional flexibility to have that innate human inventiveness, then you're basically killing that cycle. You're killing the rising of a new business model, creating more employment, rejuvenating the economy. Then it ossifies and falls off, and then a new one comes in, rejuvenates the economy, it ossifies and falls off. You just start to choke that cycle because there are fewer and fewer individuals who have the psychological capability of generating the cycle. Either that or we're just all being farmed for needs.
There's probably more to it than just the psychological capability there. I think there's obviously the ability to create innovation and the ability to innovate, but there's also the
you even look at truly oppressed people, right? And the amount of creativity that came out of, say, the black community in the early 1900s with respect to music, and things like that. I mean, that was some serious innovation. That was some serious creativity, and that came out of an extremely oppressive environment. So I don't know whether oppression on its own or marginalization or disenfranchisement on its own can stymie that kind of thing, but I do think that it can make it so that it's not socially acceptably productive. It's not productive in ways that feed the system. You know, it's productive in ways that defy the system.
The cannibalized resources out of the system. I'd like to point out, though, that in the previously oppressed, and I won't say they're not oppressed now. I mean, racism is still an issue. But in the extreme racial oppression that happened, that produced sort of the music revolution and a lot of the black cultural revolutions, you didn't have the sexual segregation within the black culture. You had a segregation between white culture and African American culture in America, but you didn't have the population within the black culture divided along biological lines, and one group elevated and praised and held apart from their accountability, and the other group essentially punished based on a component of their identity.
You know what's really, really kind of surprising to me is because during slavery, I read a paper on women's hidden role in slavery, and it went into the role of white women, the role of female slaves, women on the secret railroad or whatever, all of that, and women slave traders. And but one thing that it said was that black society, black culture during slavery was a matriarchy. And for whatever reason, they managed to pull themselves out of that. And I think it was because they weren't pitted against each other. They were actually forcibly separated from each other, from someone who is an identifiable enemy and someone who they both recognized as an identifiable enemy.
And that allowed the cooperation to resume and to take that violence out of the system. Now,
yeah.
this is a really interesting.
segregation between genders.
I wish we had time to talk about this tonight. Unfortunately, we are just a few minutes away from the end of the show where we just aren't going to be able to talk about it anymore. And I have to do a little bit of business here.
All right.
First of all, I want to thank all the callers tonight and thank Typhon Blue for calling. But I also want to remind everybody that this is our spring fundraiser. This is the thing that keeps the show going and the website going and allows us to do things like print up T-shirts that say, I heart FTSU. So anybody who has an extra dollar rattling around in their pocket, I ask you to please go over to avoiceformen.com, and on the right-hand side, scrolling down the page, you will see a donate button. That is how you can help us keep this show going and keep the website running, providing content for you, and I think relief for a lot of people. So I won't say very much more about that. The other thing I would like to say, and we're really, really out of time, is to remind everybody to take the red pill.